You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. And now your footwear insiders, Matt Priest and Andy Polk.
I get it, everybody. Everybody wants to hear all the juicy gossip in D.C. You hear it all the time. You've watched all the extensive election coverage of CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, going further to the right, Newsmax, OAN Network, further on the left, NPR, I don't know, like anything around that stuff. Like, I know you've heard it all, but there are some things from this past election that stand out to us as professional, kind of government relations professionals based in DC, working in government, running multiple campaigns, executive branch experience, congressional experience, etc. So we're gonna flesh that out a bit today, right, Matt? We're gonna try to steer away from those things you all know and have heard of, and we're gonna try to drill down a little bit more from our professional backgrounds and give you some tips and ideas about the election, summation of it, but also what it kind of means for footwear people going forward.
Yeah, exactly, Andy. And so what Thomas and I do actually on a weekly basis for our membership, 2 p.m. Eastern every Tuesday, is kind of help try to read the tea leaves and understand what's going on. So a lot of the analysis that we are now gifting to the broader industry who are not FDRA members, but who can access this podcast, this is what we're going to provide to you today. Our analysis, what we expect going forward, what a Biden administration will mean. And so to help us do that, Andy, we're going to need Thomas Crockett, who's our Director of Government Affairs. So Thomas is joining us today. Thomas, what's up, man? Welcome to Shoe and Show as always.
Hey guys, excited to talk about this topic. As you said, we've been talking about it a lot on the weekly calls, but it keeps making the news cycle, and there's a lot to unpack here. So I'm glad we're going to do that today as well.
Yeah, I think the challenge from the election perspective, when you look at things, it doesn't add up like it used to, right? If you look back at 2000, 2004, and even previously before that, things made sense politically, right? Like there was a voter who had an issue that they really cared about, or they had a set of values or ideas and they went with one party over the other. This election, we kind of threw it into a blender and things kind of spit out in ways that we didn't really anticipate. For instance, in the past, the party of the working class man or labor unions have been Democratic, but yet working class people overwhelmingly went for Trump. You have issues around Trump's Hispanic vote gains were pretty astronomical in ways that people didn't anticipate. Especially
in Florida too. I mean, that was a key state to win with the Hispanic vote.
Right. And that he was able to turn out over 70 million people to vote for him in ways that many of the political pundits assumed that he had a ceiling where he could only get a certain amount of votes out from his kind of base and his core, where his campaign was saying we can turn out more votes than people anticipate. So that's really, for me, the election was really difficult as a professional because I see all these things that did not make sense from what we have known historically as elections, right?
Yeah, it was an election that, you're right, a lot of the prevailing views were set aside. There's been a lot of commentary on the polling. I think some of the polling was accurate, some of it was very inaccurate. But what's interesting about it is that I think the American people, maybe in search of respite from the drama, were looking for divided government in some way and decided, you know what, we'll insert someone else in the White House. But not everything is bad. Not all the policies of the Republican Party are bad necessarily, as was forecasted by the polling. And it seemed like the American people wanted some of the more Republican policies, but were kind of tired of the personalities dominating the news cycle. And so that, I think that leads us as an industry the opportunity to catch our breath and maybe to build in some more certainty in the process, something that has been drastically missing over the last 4 years. Whether you love the president or hate him, I think we can all agree it's been an uncertain environment for trade in particular and for business in particular. And so I think this might be a moment where the pendulum stops swinging back and forth dramatically, settles in the middle for a little bit, even for a moment, and we can kind of, collectively catch our breath.
I think one thing that's just crazy about this, though, is the turnout, either in spite of COVID or because of COVID. A lot of states put in these new voting procedures with mail-in ballots and multiple voting days. Normally you have one day to vote. Now here in DC, you had a whole month when you could get your ballot in. And just looking at the turnout, I mean, if we go back, to earlier elections, you see in the 50 million, a candidate getting in the 50 million vote range for the popular vote. But when you turn to Obama in 2008, he shattered this record with, around 69.4 million votes. And then the next election, that was in 2008, 2012, he got 65 million. Now we're talking 71 million for Trump, 76 or 75 million for Biden, and the numbers keep going up. I mean, the turnout is just crazy. And I think when you're looking at that and you're talking about these policy implications for the Republican Party, 71 plus million people voted for Trump. And obviously, liked what they were seeing, and that may include the populist message on trade. And so that's a really interesting and challenging thing going forward is where do we go from, where does the Republican Party go from here? Where do we go from here on trade? And just how does that impact us going forward as an industry that relies so heavily on international trade?
I think the challenge was that from the polling that we saw, that we assumed that the government would basically be controlled by Democrats from the White House, the Senate, and the House, and then we would have a sea change of policy taking place. But instead, the voters basically said to what Matt said, we kind of like this divided government idea of being able to say. And it's not, I think the challenge for the Democrats was it's not a full repudiation of Trumpism, nor does a repudiation of Trumpism even within the Republican Party, because you still see as he has lost the election at this point, you still see senators backing him up on election fraud claims and things like that. So it's really interesting that I'm not sure that we have a clear path forward for America in terms of policy. There's still going to be a lot of kind of brackish water where things are kind of churning about as we kind of figure out where this stuff lays down. But really interestingly, unanticipated is the year of the woman on the Republican side. There's a ton of female candidate Republicans who won, who were some unexpected. But especially in the House, you have probably the largest number of women, obviously, than ever before, both on Democrat and Republican side. But the real gains for women were through the Republican Party, which was unexpected. Pollsters missed a lot, but also got a lot right. And this is where I think the media kind of is churning it wrong. It's easy to blame the pollsters for some of the big misses and how tight it was. But they also got a lot right around this idea of a red mirage, where on election day we see all red, and then as they start counting the votes after the fact, it turns a lot blue, especially in places like Pennsylvania, Arizona, Michigan, et cetera, these Rust Belt states that Biden had to win and Trump had to win, and it shook out one way or the other. But they still got a lot right in terms of when people were voting. They got a lot wrong, but they got a lot right as well. So, and it's not like we have anything better than polls at this point to tell us public sentiment. There'll be new additions to that to kind of help judge where things are headed. But if we look at the new Congress and obviously the new administration that's going to be coming in, it's going to be obvious there's not going to be a whole lot done. But I'm interested to see, Thomas and Matt, your opinion on what that means for trade, because obviously trade is the biggest thing for our industry, with 99% of all shoes sold in the U.S. imported. So I don't know what you guys are hearing or thinking around that.
Yeah. So, there's a lot to unpack. I think the expectation is return to normalcy in the policymaking process from the administration side, right? So reinvigorating the interagency process, which is all the agencies that handle trade and the federal government coming together, both on the political and the civil servant side, providing guidance and feedback on what the policy should be, and then floating those decisions up the flagpole all the way to the president if need be, to make decisions on policy making. So I think from a general sense, I think we'll be in a more standard policy making apparatus that we're used to, that I'm used to from the Bush administration, that all three of us are used to on the Hill front. And I think that'll be important for certainty. The question does come down to what will President Biden pivot from what Trump has been doing as it relates to China, as it relates to 301 investigation in Vietnam. There's been a number of kind of folks on the record who are in the Biden orbit, either in the transition or an advisor to the campaign, talking about maybe dialing back some of the use of tariffs as blunt force objects, building broader coalitions to challenge China, whether in the WTO or somewhere else. Again, these are all kind of return to normal protocols as it relates to policymaking. So those are positives in my mind. But I don't think there's going to be an immediate withdrawal from tariffs on China via the China 301 China agreement, the phase one agreement. I think the president-elect has indicated he's going to be focused on COVID response and making sure the economy is enhanced. Infrastructure. These are the things he's looked at before he wants to pivot to trade. The question, though, is that as China has now signed a new agreement, the Regional Cooperation Economic Partnership, the RCEP, it is not as deep as the TPP would have gone, but it might force the Biden administration's hand to reassert American influence economically in the region and push us into rejoining TPP maybe at some point. I think the big question goes back to the influence of Trump. Historically, the Republican Party has been pro-free trade. It's been in our platform for decades up until 2016 when Trump pulled it out. And so will there be this notion that you've heard Senator Rubio and others point to, that we need to continue this is Rubio speaking, the Republican Party needs to continue to be focused on the working class folks and have a more of a kind of a raised eyebrow towards free trade and what corporate interests are asking for. And so what does that do to the Republican calculation for trade opportunities in the Senate? What does it do for it in the House? Will there be Democratic proponents of trade in the House that pick up the mantle and run with it? Will President-elect Biden seek free trade and negotiating authority in the summer of next year when it expires? So there's all these things swirling because I like that brackish water analogy, Andy. There's these things just swirling in the trade space where we kind of feel optimistic about it, but we're not quite sure because the administration that's incoming has not set out a lot of specifics as to what it actually wants to do.
Tom, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think that's a really key point on the lack of specifics. We went through on a recent trade call where we were talking about what we see happening with trade and reading the tea leaves, and there's just not a lot of tea leaves to read. The Biden administration has not really laid out a strong trade vision like it has in other areas. We expect a lot, or at least some, from the Obama administration to come over into USTR, the United States Trade Representative's Office, so people that we've worked with in the past. But if you remember that last big vote on TPP, you had 28 Democrats in the House and 13 Democrats in the Senate that voted to pass it, along with the Republicans. So, and that was at the very end of Obama's last year in office when that was passed. And so it's a lot. There's a lot going on right now with China and everyone wanting to kind of think how we handle a lot of the complex issues in China. TPP would be an obvious answer, an important path to really work with our allies in the region on addressing these issues, which many of them share. But I think you're dealing with the challenges that have always existed on trade with Democrats. The Republicans have been the free trade party. Now they've got this complex issue with what has Trump done to the party on trade. You're going to need to build this coalition of Democrats again to pass trade promotion authority. That's the tool that allows for the administration to negotiate these agreements. You're going to need to build this coalition to advance TPP if it does get renegotiated and the U.S. joins it. And so that's a challenge. And I think too, just the divided government. I mean, look back at Obama when he came in, or Bush or Clinton. Oftentimes presidents come in and they have a unified Congress when they can really work with that Congress to pass these initiatives, whether it's tax cuts with Bush or whether it's health care with Obama, his start to being in office. Biden doesn't have that, and he certainly doesn't have a mandate with 71 million people voting for Trump. And so that's going to create there's so many wild cards here going into next year. And I know he wants to unify everyone and bring everyone together. But there's just going to be a lot that he's going to have to really work through, and trade is going to be a complex issue. So I'm optimistic that we'll make progress in these areas, but recognizing there are some real and significant challenges going forward.
Yeah, you guys are reading tea leaves, and I'm drinking coffee, so we're on two different kind of caffeinated paths. But I think if I'm reading the coffee leaves or the coffee beans that are sitting here in front of me, I think there's some really juicy stuff that, as I promised at the start, that we would give you some juicy stuff that you're not going to hear on CNN. Here's what I think the juicy part is. There's going to be a battle over working class citizens or voters or however you want to phrase it. But the Democrats look at what happened in the election and where Trump was able to pull off traditional labor folks, working class voters that would traditionally go Democrat. And there's going to be a fight for the soul of that kind of voting bloc. And I think Democrats around trade especially are going to be much more bullish on labor provisions and trade bills and negotiations than even Obama was, or even, when Hillary Clinton was running in 2016, that she was talking about those environmental and labor stuff. I think that's going to be a big push, is like how these policies in Congress are all going to be encapsulated around these working class voters, that many of which may be unemployed right now or on furlough, right? So it's not just this idea of a stimulus. It's this idea of what does it look like going forward to retrain these workers and engage them into a digital economy that we're now in. And it's going to be really interesting to see how Republicans and Democrats fight over policies and ideas to keep those voters on their side, or realign them with, from the Democrats, how they realign them on that. So that all of a sudden creates a real push and pull with how ideologically and policy-wise Democrats and Republicans will look at every issue that's out there. The secondary thing that I really think is very juicy is the external forces and internal forces that we now have. So Trump's not going away. I don't know if he's creating his own media empire on his own way, or he's still going to have a Twitter account. He's still going to throw bombs into the process that will influence Republican congressmen and senators to go one way or the other, because Trump will have 30 million people at any given time able to make phone calls or bombard a member and browbeat them into the way that he wants them to go. So he's still going to be around doing that. And internally, I think what you're going to see is more AOC type personalities. So on the left, kind of the progressives are getting a lot stronger, because not just because their numbers have grown or because they're more savvy at the kind of the media now is catching on to them and presenting them a lot more because the storylines are really intriguing, or because they know how to use social media so well. But it's because the vote count in the House now is so small that Nancy Pelosi is going to have to do what John Boehner did and go across the aisle and try to get votes from Republicans. So those internal forces of trying to battle with the speaker and battle with the institutions and battle with the structure is going to be really interesting on the progressive side. But it's going to be the same way on the Republican side, because you have a lot of new members that are coming in that are far right wing, even you could call them conspiratorial theorists in some way, that will be doing the same thing, throwing ratchets in different ways. And so when we talk about the brackish waters in Congress, it's going to be really interesting, because you have all these personalities that all have a platform now and have different groups backing them to push and pull processes in one way or the other. But ultimately, and I think I'm right on my vote count. It's been a while, but I think you need 218 in the House to pass legislation. Thomas and Matt can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 218. And that's the number. That's the only number that matters when it comes down to some of these policies. And the question is, with all these influences, external, internal, can Pelosi work with McCarthy to figure out a voting block that gets things through? And if they can't set aside differences, then nothing will ever pass through Congress. So it's really interesting how these things are being shaped and will be shaped around issues and individuals in ways that we haven't seen, and in ways, again, the media hasn't really covered fully. The storylines, are going to emerge, and you'll see that coming in 2021. But we're all looking at the White House, and I'm telling people, hey, the fun, interesting stuff is all in the House. And obviously in January, we'll be in the Senate to see if it's going to be 50-50 or the Republicans are going to have 52-48. Because I'm telling you, and Thomas, we all grew up in the South, so we all know, but the people aren't going to go in and vote for one person and vote for another party, right? They're not going to split a ticket in a runoff. You're either going to vote Republican both or you're going to vote Democrat both. So it's going to be, one party is going to be very happy and one party is going to be very upset. We don't know how that's going to shake out. But so those are some things I'm thinking about that are kind of juicy, fun things to think about. And now you guys can kind of sip on that coffee and tell me whether it's bitter or sweet.
No, I think you've nailed it in a lot of ways. It is super juicy. And there's so many ways you can kind of deconstruct it, in the sense that if you think about on the trade front and the working class voter, the fight for the working class voter, which I think is so right on, the Democrats are much better positioned for that, because one, when it comes to trade, they already have a left investor state dispute settlement, the ISDS provisions, the investor state dispute settlement provisions and trade agreements. They don't like that. They think the corporations kind of run roughshod over the process and get what they want out of free trade agreements. Then you have the working class voter that has suspicion around free trade. And so I think the Democrats can kind of reclaim that in a way. So that, I think that will guide President Biden in a lot of ways, is does he want to go and make a play for those voters? And so I think that's something to think about. But we could have in January of 2017, the month that President Trump was sworn in, he filed for re-election, right? To much fanfare in his mind. So now he can file in January of 2021 to run for the Republican nomination for president in 2024. Can you imagine what that will do to the system? And then we'll run into an off-year election, which is typically not a good year for the incumbent president. So I think Kevin McCarthy, your point in the House side, he is so empowered right now. Yeah. He may be in the minority, but he's got a lot of cards to play, and he's heading into an opportunity to retake the House in 2022.
He's the biggest winner of the election. People are talking about Biden, and McCarthy's the biggest winner of the election, and it may be Mitch McConnell again. I mean, Mitch McConnell's been the biggest winner for the past, 4 years or so, with what he's been able to do with the Senate and justices and the tax cuts and other things. Like, a lot of people talk about Trump, and it's like, you know what? There's a guy who was passing all that stuff and getting it over the line in difficult circumstances. But I think you're right, Matt. I think the scary thing is, and I say it's scary because of institutionalism and because of political norms and the way that we conduct our presidential politics, is Trump could launch campaign rallies in January and start it all over again and just do a whole tour. He'd probably do tickets. That'd be my guess. I mean, he's going to make money somehow, and it's not going to be a book deal, right? It's going to be, going around the country selling out stadiums, doing one of his shows, or doing it on YouTube. Anyway, he's not going away. It just depends on what Trump we get, whether it's going to be full on Trump or whether it's going to be strategic Trump. I don't know if we have a strategic Trump.
That's an oxymoron.
But he's going to be there.
Yeah, and the thing is, I mean, one thing you got to keep in mind too is he can still run again. I mean, he can run again in 2024, pull a Grover Cleveland and do 2 terms, just not back to back, or try to do 2 terms. And so this could start a campaign mode. And I think
that's what I was saying. He could announce and register in January in a couple months that he's running. He could, because he did it in 2017 right after he was inaugurated.
Yeah. So Yeah, so I mean, I think that coffee leave is right on there, and I also think, you're dealing with the Mitch McConnell coffee leaf is right on too, Andy, because Biden and McConnell have worked really well together in the past on a number of things. When McConnell was heading the Senate and Biden was vice president, they had to negotiate together, and so they had this really great working relationship. Then will that carry over now? And will they come up with something on, say, transportation funding, a big infrastructure package? How will they handle that? And I think the other thing is, looking back at TPP, are there lessons learned? I mean, I think one of the challenges was doing it in an election year, trying to pass it in 2016, and then you had basically both candidates saying that they're not going to support it, and so that created a real problem. But also, we're just in a new environment now. And I think there was a lot of educating that the one positive over the past 4 years with Trump's trade policy is we've learned, the public and everyone has really learned a lot about the importance of trade, the impact of tariffs, things that we've been saying for years because we have such high tariffs on footwear. Everybody else kind of became really tuned in on that, on the danger and the harm of tariffs. And so I think we're going to have to kind of keep that in mind going forward on TPP. Is it's just a different environment. That the way that the opposition to TPP, use social media and other platforms to really kind of take over some of the messaging, and then you had a presidential candidate who became president who really launched onto that and used that as a message that resonated with the working class voter, even though you had a lot of Republican senators who were saying, look, this is going to be great for our state because this is going to help the ag industry. This is going to help our farmers reach new markets. This is critical for them. Even though you had that, you had this very strong message that ended up resulting in TPP getting torn up on day one. At least symbolically, both candidates said they weren't going to be a part of it, and then Trump on day one, said he was withdrawing from the agreement. So just a lot of lessons to learn from that of how you kind of handle trade going forward, and also it'll be interesting to see how Biden and McConnell do work together to negotiate things that could be beneficial to the Biden administration.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because I think Biden is he can compromise and he can bend to get something big done, right? He's the guy who believes that he needs to get 80% of something and not 95% of something, right? So that's just the old Senate way of doing things, right? If you can get 80% of what you want, you take it. And we just haven't seen that the last couple of presidencies on both sides, where people it was a zero-sum game to a certain extent for different reasons. But I think there's an ability to do that. I think on trade, the biggest miss for trade on TPP then and still, and I'm curious to see how this plays out, but it's such a heavy economic message that it missed completely the point of being able to contain China and Southeast Asia. To me, TPP and the big trade bloc was just as important to national security and foreign policy as it was to economic growth. Meaning, is there a way that we can help other Southeast Asian countries grow economically, reduce our military burden in those areas, the U.S. military burden, allowing them to grow their own militaries and not be economically enmeshed by China and pulled in like we're seeing now? That message was there, but it was so faint, people didn't really hear it. And my question, and this is what I'm looking at around the trade stuff, is, and I think Republicans and Democrats are going to absolutely agree, they're going to be both very hawkish on China around human rights. I think Biden will be very kind of blockish, meaning he's going to think about containment. He's going to think about alliances. He's not going to go head to head with him like we saw with Trump. He'll be very strategic about that. But around that, does that then mean that we can talk about trade deals? Maybe not a big trade deal like TPP, but we could do bilaterals with some of those countries like Vietnam, et cetera. Could we see that through the lens of this containment strategy and this human rights issue of building other countries? And we'll have those conversations about environmental and labor concerns, which are the Democrat concerns around those kind of trade deals. But if we phrase it in those lenses, we have a real opportunity in ways that we didn't with TPP, that people could understand why we're doing this beyond just this kind of economic, corporate, I don't want to say but it is in some way this corporate message that we have about spreading democracy through corporations and things like that, which I do believe in, but the corporate message allows too many holes to get poked into it. So is there a foreign policy argument, a national security argument that could get both sides on? And that would be the dominant argument for something like that versus the economic angle where it gets poked in by the Bernie Sanders folks. And
I think you're so right, man. I think there's two ironies here. One, the first irony is that the administration tore up TPP on the first day in office, January 23rd, 2017. It was a huge blunder from we're going to get tough on China posture. Subsequently, they went for a multitude of years hammering China left and right, applying a ton of tariffs. And you scratch your head as like, man, you could have done all those things. Fine. If that's what you want to do and wreak havoc, go for it. But you could have also done this thing called TPP, which would have been like an extra level of strategic initiative to accomplish the goals you set out to accomplish on China. Now, fast forward to the current political landscape. Ironically, all the battering of China has put forward on a silver platter the arguments for the Biden administration to go back into TPP, right? It's this, we're going to be tough on China and we're going to argue it from how you just laid it out, Andy. But we could only have gotten there if it wasn't for this back and forth that Trump has had with it. And also, in a larger extent, probably Xi Jinping's, economic and influence spreading across the globe in a variety of different ways, what he's doing in Hong Kong, the Uyghurs, all this stuff wrapped up into one. But now it's prime. I mean, I think the messaging is prime to be pushed out to the American people to say, this is important to do, and we're going to do it. You couple that with the RCEP announcement in this just a week or two ago. And now I just think it's almost a no-brainer in my mind if Biden can explain it to those working class voters in a way that makes sense. And I know the farmers will be excited about opening up those export markets. I mean, they're already calling for it. So you don't have to pay off the farmer anymore from the pain you've done with China. You can open up export markets. And I think there's I still have the image in my head of the president signing his proclamation to withdraw from TPP and at the Resolute desk on day one. And I just think what a dumb thing to have done if you're going to then go after China in all these different ways. It just made no sense. There was no strategy to it.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of anything else that came out of this election. I mean, there's just so much stuff that this is basically us sitting around the table talking, which is nice. But I do think I think to kind of sum up this conversation, we had a lot of, when we think about policy and passing things and analyzing things, there's a political calculus to things, right? There's a mathematical, there's systemic things, there's institutions, there's ways of doing things. So in the past, we always had this political calculus about what needs to move and who we need to move and all these different things. And that's why some people call it the swamp, which is an interesting phrase. But I think the swamp is quite an interesting place because of the ecosystem, because of really intelligent people trying to do good things. Not all people trying to do good things, but most people trying to do good things. And it's where all this calculus is done in this weird environment. And in the past, we had linear processes and we knew things and we knew how things were going to go. And then all of a sudden, when Trump came in, it really kind of threw a ratchet and the political calculus was almost like new math, right? Some new math teacher came in and says, I know that someone told you to do these equations to get the answer, but here's new equations to figure out. So it kind of shocked everybody in the way things were going. I think now we're looking at the math again the way it was pre-Trump, right? So the swamp didn't go away. It didn't get drained. Actually, it increased a lot because it made it more confusing. It made it a lot more confusing, and that means when things get confusing, you throw money at a problem. The swamp got a lot bigger. So now we're looking at where the situation in D.C. is like the old math is reemerging. The traditional equations are there. It's just harder math. There's more inputs, and it's like instead of doing 5 layers of math, it's like 20 layers right? So that's why it's so complicated sometimes to go through these things, because we can tell you what levers are going to happen and we can tell you how someone may go, but these external forces are new. These internal forces are new. The new vote counts are new. And so, even we are trying to get our footing about how we rewrite our math to make sure members understand what that means. And what that means is, it's like, if you're a member, you need to join these weekly calls every Tuesday.
Yep.
Because the math changes every week, and you need to be on the call every week to understand where it's headed. Because if you think I can just pop in once a month and get what I need, the math is going to change. I'm sorry. Exactly. So, kudos.
You brought the swamp thing. I just get something off my chest. This whole drain the swamp thing, and I'm a registered lobbyist, so I guess all of us are the footwear representation in the swamp. But the president had a hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue that, guess what? When there were decisions being made in front of the government, the people coming in to lobby for those decisions were booking huge room blocks at the Trump Hotel. The swamp got even swampier, and it was a brilliant political statement to make and go around the country talking about. But to think that the swamp would have been cleared up by a Trump presidency is ridiculous. And now I'm done. Thank you.
All right. Thomas, you have any parting thoughts or anything we may have missed that you want to cover really quickly?
I think you really hit it on two things. The math, it is just we've got to really figure out how the equations have been changed. Everything that we've talked about, from how Trump changed the Republican Party to what you talked about the Democrats, and how that party has changed, where they're going to go from here. That's going to and not to mention what happens with the Senate. All of those factors are going to change the equations in January. And so the second thing tied into that is those weekly calls. Those are very important. We've talked a lot about big trade items that may move. There's some smaller ones that could move even before the end of the year, such as the miscellaneous tariff bill, which is a temporary tariff relief bill, includes a lot of over 100 different footwear products in that. But that's something we talk about on the weekly call. And so that could move. It could move quickly. The other thing is the stuff that's going on in Xinjiang, the issue with Uyghurs. That's another issue that could move very quickly in the Senate. And so we cover those and other issues every week on the call. And so while we're talking about these big items like trade and TPP and things like that, there's some smaller initiatives that will directly impact the industry that could happen before the end of the year, could happen in January, could happen with the new administration as soon as they get into office. So we'd encourage everybody to check those out every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And
you can sign up FDRA.org right on the top banner. You can click and sign up. And if you're a member, we'll approve you quickly.
Yeah. And just go to like Matt said, just go to the website and see the banner there and sign up. And we hope to see you on those calls, because there are a lot, it is changing quickly. That's a big thing going forward is just things are going to move potentially faster. And so we want to keep you updated every week on those calls. So Andy, glad that you mentioned that as well.
Yeah, I think it's super important, because if our math's changing, then you got to be on here to hear all our different math I hate math personally, but I love political math because it's moving parts, right? It's not these weird equations that the math teacher tried to tell me in class, and I just failed all the quizzes on. The political math's really interesting because it's tied into personalities, it's tied into ideas. It's really fascinating. So I mean, to Matt's point where he gets kind of mad about it, I'd laugh at the swamp representation, because I think there's DC really is this like intellectual place where it's typically meritocracy. If you're really good and you're smart and you're trying to do good things, you can move forward and move policy and change lives for the better. Obviously, there's some people here who are not doing that, but it weeds those people out. Those people will not stay here. Those people leave. They can't cut it. And it's the only place in the world that I know that that's true. So, I mean, I like swimming. I'm glad I'm an alligator in the swamp. And you need an alligator in these days.
Yeah. So, I took my friend's mom on a tour of the Capitol, and she asked me point blank, like, where are all the lobbyists located? And I knew it was kind of a derogatory statement just based on her tone. And I said, well, they're not here. They're on K Street, and they're located all over the city. And she clearly kind of wanted to steer clear of them. And I said to her, well, and I knew her very well. I said, well, the Baptist church has a lobbyist, right? She's like, really? I said, oh yeah. I said, every church does. And the University of North Carolina university system, she was from North Carolina, they have a multitude of lobbyists. No, you don't say. I'm like, yeah. And I went through like several examples of things that impact her life personally, that to let her know that there was representation in Washington for that interest group, that people group, that initiative, that whatever it is. And I said, I would be upset if the organizations I was involved in did not have representation here. This is how the system works. It's not evil. It's not to Andy's point. There's a lot of intellectual good engagement here in the city. And so the swamp notion just always irks me, because it paints this bad brushstroke across everybody. When at the end of the day, my hope is that every organization I have an interest in actually has representation and is representing my interests in those specific areas here in DC. And so I hope we kind of get away from some of that nomenclature here in the future.
Here, huzzah! Exactly. Maybe it's just the swamp talking to the swamp, and everybody else.
Exactly. It's an echo chamber.
Well, let's get out of the swamp for a second and get out of some of this stuff. I know some of this stuff's really intense. If you're really into politics, hopefully you enjoyed the conversation. If you're not really into politics, I hope you still enjoy the conversation, because this impacts your wallet. If you're working in the footwear industry, this impacts your job. It impacts our companies. It impacts our consumers. These are important conversations to keep having around these things. And we'll keep running the math, and we'll keep advocating, and we'll keep getting folks involved so they can also share their voice here in Washington, D.C. and around state capitals and other capitals around the world. But as we kind of wrap things up, I do want to bring in Jasmine to kind of elevate the conversation and take it in a different direction. Jasmine, please save us from ourselves.
Well, today we're going to focus on Thomas, only because I always get to hear when we do our What You Got, What You Getting segments, I always get to hear from Matt and Andy, but we don't have Thomas on very often. So I'm curious, Thomas, this, of course, when you're going on the Hill, you're definitely in dress shoes and suit, and things have changed dramatically. So what you got on your feet now, and what you're getting, what have you been buying over this time? Like, let's get some insight on your closet during this time period.
Well, that's a great question. I think, I've been with everything as it is right now with COVID, you can get outside and run. So I have been trying to do that as much as I can. And so I bought a pair of Brooks Adrenaline running shoes, and those are great. That's kind of my go-to. I've actually kind of worn them down a little bit. I feel like I'm about to order another pair. And then, so that's kind of my go-to there. Pretty casual right now, just have on a pair of flip-flops. But as far as, and then hiking shoes, I think, that's another thing. It's getting winter time right now, and that's something you can do. You can get outside and go for a walk. There's a lot of good trails around here. So I really want some Danner hiking boots, and I'm hoping to get those soon. But yeah, that's it for me.
What about your wife or your baby? Any new shoes coming in for the holidays?
Yeah, so we actually have to get new shoes. I was walking our daughter, and the other day, and I looked down and she was missing a shoe. So she picked it up in the store. I went back and looked for there's some Stride Right shoes. And so now we're on like a backup pair of these little tennis shoes we've got. And so anyway, I've got to get some new ones. So we lost them, and we still, could never found it. But that's her new habit, is to, take her shoes off, or in the stroller, and sometimes throw them down.
Yeah, that's something I do often. What would you say, Andy?
I said you got to watch them.
Yeah.
They are crazy.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing, Thomas.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we should say, I mean, I feel like obviously we constantly talk about, Jasmine, about how COVID's changing style and fashion. I feel like DC might be one of those, and maybe a small narrow section of DC at this point too, because the city has changed so much. I mean, people don't realize DC's a tech city. It's an innovative city. It's a foodie city now. People don't, if you haven't been to DC in years, it's a great place. But people are still going to wear suits in DC. I mean, young people who don't have any experience wear suits because it's fake it until you make it to a certain extent. I lived that life and that dream for a couple of years until I actually knew what I was talking about. But DC will still be a suit city, and I feel like a lot of other places will not be a suit city, and maybe not a full-on dress type shoe unless there's an occasion for it. So I think that's an interesting thing to note too about Thomas's wardrobe. May not have to change that much. Good job, Thomas. Save those pennies for your baby.
Exactly.
That's funny, folks. Thank you for joining our table today and taking a listen to what's popping around our heads after this election and where things are headed. It's a very interesting time. I want to encourage people to be optimistic about where things are headed. I want us to try to take a collective breath and get through where we've been the last several months. A lot of tension, a lot of uncertainty. But as we go through things, obviously, there'll still be a battle of ideas and a battle of policy. And as Americans, we can get through this if we can talk to each other, and we can just take a pause and just appreciate that we're all on the same team. Sometimes it doesn't feel that way when we watch the news or when we talk to our neighbors or when you post something on Facebook, but we're all on the same team. We're all going to get through this together. We'll all work together. We'll have our fights and our spats, but ultimately we all have the same goal, which is to make America stronger. And for us is to make the footwear industry stronger. So again, as we said, join the Tuesday calls. If you're not an FDRA member, get involved. Have a voice at the table. Help us have a voice for our consumers, our footwear consumers. But again, as we come up on the holiday season, we're extremely thankful for our industry. We're extremely thankful for our listeners. We want you guys to tell us what topics, who we should have on. Drop us a line if we can ever give you a help. Go to shoeandshow.com. Our full catalog is on there. But again, on behalf of Jasmine and Matt and Thomas, myself, and other members of our staff, thank you so much for allowing us to serve you here in Washington, D.C., which is still the greatest country in the world. I know there's other people listening around the world. I'm sorry, but that's just how we feel. We love you, and we love your countries. We respect your countries, but we still feel like because we have self-determination here, we should pat ourselves on the back for going through an election where everybody thought violence would occur, and it did not occur. And institutions did not fail, and democracy still won out. So that's why I say that. Love and respect to all of you. Thank you again. Until next time, Shoe In is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.